Growing up, I thought helping Mr. Henderson with his garden was the best job a kid could ask for. It was the early 2000s. I lived with my mom on a quiet row house block where everybody knew everybody, and my parents had split when I was 9, so mom worked 8 to 7 at an insurance office, and I was mostly on my own. No siblings, just me and a PlayStation, and a bike I rode up and down our little grid of streets till the streetlights blinked on. Mr. Henderson was 2 houses down, short, a little heavy, thinning dark hair, that friendly smile people trust without thinking. He said he was an accountant, but he was always home, always out there trimming, watering, straightening, like his yard was a store window and he was the manager. His lawn was perfect, flower beds like they'd been measured, hedges clean enough to line up a ruler. When I was 11, he offered me $15 a week if I came by on Saturdays to help, which to me felt like winning a game show. And mom said yes immediately because learning to work is good for you. And also, honestly, because $15 meant I stopped asking her for game money. Every Saturday at 10, I'd knock, and we'd do 2 or 3 hours together. Weeding, watering, raking in the fall, and in winter I'd scrape his steps in the walk, because he said a clean path keeps people from slipping. I liked how he said things like rules. He always had cold lemonade and those fancy cookies from the nice grocery store, and we'd sit on the back steps for breaks while he asked about school, the games I was playing, which levels I couldn't beat, all that. He'd tell me stories about backpacking Europe in the 70s and show me photo albums, trains, hostels, a plaza full of pigeons. He said his wife left a long time ago, no kids, and he appreciated company, which made sense, and I started thinking of him like the good uncle type I didn't have. It was steady, almost 2 full years of Saturdays except holidays, or if I had a cousin's birthday. I didn't see anything strange in it. If anything felt off, it was tiny stuff I didn't clock as anything. Like how he preferred I come alone. Once I asked to bring a friend and he said, "Next time, champ, it's easier when it's just us, fewer tools to worry about." Or how he'd tug my work gloves to check the fit and say we'd get the right size for these hands soon, then forget to buy them. Nothing big, just little things you shrug off because you're a kid and the lemonade is cold. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how normal it all stayed. Routine makes you dumb about changes, I think. He added small jobs, like wiping the glass on the back door or stacking fertilizer in the shed, and he'd keep a neat little cash envelope with my name on it. Always the same bills, folded the same way. He gave me an old handheld camera one Saturday. "For your games, take a victory photo when you beat 'em." And I took a picture of the lawn by accident, and he laughed too long at it like it was a joke with a meaning I didn't get. He asked more questions as I got older too, normal stuff at first, teachers, homework, then closer stuff, like who I hung out with and who my mom was dating, which seemed like neighborhood gossip more than anything. He showed me his garage one time, only the parts he was proud of, the pegboard with every tool outlined, and kept the door to the little back room shut. Said it was just storage, messy, and he'd wave me back toward the flowers. If my mom got home early, he'd wrap up quick and send me off with my envelope like a boss who doesn't want to keep you late. And I thought that was just him being respectful. It never felt like danger. It felt like I was helpful, and he was nice, and grown-ups liked reliable kids. When I turned 13, Mom started seeing Dennis, a detective. He was fine, not trying to be my dad, just polite, asked about school, remembered my game scores in that way. Cops remember small details, which made me step up my homework a little. I didn't want a detective thinking I was lazy. One night we're eating spaghetti at our little table, and Mom, making small talk, mentions how she loves that I've got a job with our neighbor, Mr. Henderson, and Dennis stops chewing. Not dramatic, just a freeze. Fork halfway, eyes on Mom. He goes, real quiet. "Which Henderson?" Mom says, "Roger, on Maple." Like it's nothing. And Dennis sets his fork down and wipes his mouth, and that was the first time I saw him look like a cop at home. He asks me how long I've been helping, what days, who else is around. I told him it's just Saturdays, just me and him. Sometimes neighbors walk by. Mom's looking between us, confused, and Dennis says, still calm but tighter, "I know that name." Then he lays it out like a report. 15 years earlier, in Pennsylvania, Roger Henderson was arrested on suspicion of molesting boys. "We had statements," he says. "We had physical evidence. We had timing." Then he explains how the case fell apart. Evidence collected wrong, so it got tossed. One parent took a payout in a civil suit and refused to continue. And a couple families got leaned on by relatives who didn't want the publicity and made the kids recant. And the DA wouldn't push a trial where the chain of custody looked bad. I didn't know what chain of custody meant, he explained fast. Dennis says he was one of the officers who worked it, and that he can't forget that name or that face, and that after the charges didn't stick, Henderson moved states, started over, kept his head down. He looks at Mom, and then at me, and says, he's never been convicted of anything. Not on paper, not where we live now, and nobody in the neighborhood knew his past. Mom banned me from going anywhere near that house again. We sat at the kitchen table, and she asked straight, "Did he touch you? Ask weird things? Say anything off?" I said no. He was polite, kept it about work. Then details I never clocked lined up. On hot days, he'd tell me to take my shirt off because it was easier to work. And he'd pull out a camera and snap pictures of me bent over the beds or spraying the hose, saying it was for memories. Once he said I could swim after we finished, and I did laps while he watched from the kitchen window like he was timing me. Dennis asked careful follow-ups, calm but tight. Any closed doors? Any gifts besides the camera? Any rides in his car? That back room in the garage? I said no. No locked rooms, no trips, no creepy talk. He kept that back room shut and called it storage, and waved me away. Dennis wrote that down on a pad like he was at work. Mom gripped her coffee and I kept remembering small stuff, like how he checked my glove size by tugging each finger, or how he always asked if I could come alone. None of it was a crime on its own, but together, it looked like a plan. That night, Dennis ran it again, shorter, while Mom called the non-emergency number. He told me to box up anything Henderson had given me, the envelopes with my name and the camera, and not to delete a thing. He asked if neighbors were around during breaks, if anyone else worked there, if there were other boys. I tried to think. Just me on those Saturdays, a mailman once, a woman with a stroller who waved. He didn't say predator, but it hung there. He told Mom to vary routines and walk me to school for a few days. I said I could handle it. They were past asking. We didn't go back. No one more paycheck, no swing by for a goodbye. We do this right, Dennis said. We don't tip him off. He took the camera to a buddy who knew digital forensics. He asked me to sketch the yard and the garage on notebook paper, the shed, the back door, the hose, the bags of fertilizer, to picture lines of sight. I drew the little back room with an X because that's how it lived in my head. He told me not to tell friends and not to answer the door if Henderson knocked. I nodded. Instructions were easier than feelings. Dennis wanted to talk to Henderson, but when he checked 2 weeks later, the house was empty. A realtor sign went up and then a sale sticker. The neighbor 2 doors down said movers came late one night, boxed things fast, and a dark SUV idled while they loaded. 10 days, maybe 11, and he was gone. No forwarding name, no goodbye. Mom said he'd run because he knew Dennis knew. I stood on our porch and looked at his hedges and felt dumb for not seeing anything until someone told me what to look at. 20 years have gone by and I still circle those Saturdays. What if I had kept going? What was his endgame? Were there photos I never saw? Was I another link? Nothing happened to me in the way people mean, and I'm grateful. But the part that sticks is how easy trust felt. My son is 7 now, and I don't outsource my gut to others anymore. I was 26 and had been working at Tech World for almost 3 years when these two incidents happened. Tech World is a big electronics chain on the West Coast, and I'd worked up to senior floor manager, which meant returns, complaints, and the worst customers. The first was in March on an evening shift. A middle-aged guy came to return a laptop he'd bought 5 weeks earlier, claimed it randomly deleted all his files, work docs and family photos. He was already pissed walking up to my counter, jaw clenched, talking through his teeth. I accepted the laptop for diagnostics and explained our policy required tech verification in 2 to 3 business days. That's when he exploded. He leaned over the counter, saying we'd ruined his life, and he needed it fixed tonight or he'd lose his job. I stuck to procedure, open a ticket, intake, bench test, and he demanded a real manager. I told him I was senior floor that night. He said the photos were of his kids and his late mother, and I said data recovery wasn't guaranteed, but we'd try. He snapped that he wanted a full refund plus cash for the lost data. I told him we don't compensate personal files because warranties don't cover them. He kept repeating $10,000 like saying it louder made it policy. He started screaming that I was incompetent, that we sold garbage and scammed people, going off in front of customers. I repeated the procedure and called for the shift manager, Thomas, this calm older guy good at de-escalating. Thomas listened and gave the same answer. The customer's face went from red to purple. He slammed his fist on the counter hard enough to shake my monitor and spat, "You Asians are all the same, smiling while you rob people." Then he pulled his phone, showed a photo of a gas canister in his trunk, and said very clearly, "I've got 20 gallons of fuel in my car outside, and if I don't get my money right now, this store burns with all of you inside." Everything went quiet. Thomas kept his voice steady, told him to put the phone away and step back so we could look at options. I shifted my knee toward the panic button under the counter. Our cashier whispered to security. The guy stopped shouting and started explaining where he'd start. Computers, then TVs, then the doors, like he'd thought it through. He wasn't bluff laughing. He was flat and focused. Thomas made eye contact once and tapped the counter. That was our go signal. I pressed the silent alarm. In the back, the staff-only chime began. The customer's eyes flicked toward Geek, he realized, and bolted. Our 2 security guards were already moving. Miguel blocked the sliding doors with his body without grabbing him, and Kira stepped in from the vestibule. He juked left, knocked over a cable display, and sprinted into the parking lot. Sirens came up in under 3 minutes. 2 officers took him down outside while a third went to his car. They actually found multiple gas canisters, funnels, and lighters. I got sent home early. Next morning, our techs pulled the event logs. Our system's record resets even after wipes. He'd done a factory reset, picked remove everything, canceled, then ran it again and nuked the recovery partition. He had deleted his own files. We documented it and sent it to corporate and the detective. A few days later, a detective took my statement and said the guy had a record for threats. Corporate pushed a memo about documenting threats verbatim and staying in policy. Thomas bought the team coffee. That night taught me any customer can snap over something small. I changed my habits, stood with one hip clear of the counter, watched hands more than faces, kept the panic button within a foot of my knee, and stopped letting anyone lean across my workspace. I stopped assuming a bright store meant safety and treated every shift like a drill, not dramatic, just practical. I thought that was the worst it could get, but I was wrong. The second incident happened 4 months later, during a weekend rush when the store was packed. I was working a register during the Saturday afternoon chaos, and this guy around 50 came through my line with computer parts, about $3,000 worth. I started scanning his stuff when he squinted at my name tag and asked, "What nationality are you?" Weird question, but I answered politely that I'm Korean American. His face twisted into this ugly expression. "You Koreans, Chinese all the same, taking our jobs and then charging us through the nose," he said, getting louder. I kept scanning, trying to ignore him, but he raised his voice more. "Answer me when I'm talking to you." He called over his friend from another line and announced loudly, "Look at this Chinese girl, can't even speak proper English, and they let her work here." I asked him politely not to use offensive language, and he leaned across the counter right into my face. "People like you should be sent back on the boats you came on. You're parasites," he hissed. I kept my voice steady and stuck to policy because that's what you do when someone is wound up. I told him we could finish the transaction if he kept it civil, otherwise I'd refuse service. He snorted and tapped the pile of parts, said I was going to ring him up and throw in a manager discount for his stress, like it was funny. His buddy drifted to his shoulder, big guy in a baseball cap, and the customers behind them started sliding away toward other lines without saying anything, which always happens in these moments. Nobody wants to pick a side in a store, they just disappear. I scanned the last item and asked for payment. He didn't answer. He leaned closer, breath hot, read my name slowly like he wanted to memorize it, then said it wrong on purpose 3 times while his buddy laughed. I said, "Sir, I'm ending this transaction if you continue," and reached for the keyboard to cancel. He slapped his palm near my hand, not touching me, but close, and said, "You're gonna regret this." Then, real casual, added that parking lots get dark, and some of us don't see so well at night. That was the line where it stopped being trash talk and started being a direct threat, so I slid my foot and hit the call button under the counter. He kept going, saying he knew where my kind lived in clusters around the city, making it sound like he'd done research. Debbie, the head cashier, arrived fast, and he turned on her. "Why are you employing this illegal?" "I pay taxes for this," Debbie told him, firm and even, to step away from my register and leave the store. He wouldn't move, just kept hurling insults. Marcus, our security manager, big guy who doesn't take crap from anyone, came over and repeated the order to leave. The customer pulled out his phone and started filming me, screaming, "Here she is, illegal immigrant stealing American money." I felt tears press up, but I did the breathing thing and stared at the screen, refused to cry for him. Marcus called the cops while physically blocking the guy's view of me, and the two of them, him and his buddy, just kept shouting racist garbage until the officers came through the automatic doors. Even when the cops asked them to leave, they refused, demanding to be served by white cashiers. One officer warned them they'd be trespassed and charged with disorderly conduct. Only then did they start backing away, still filming, still yelling. As they went, the first guy pointed at me and shouted, "We remember your face, Korean rat. See you in the parking lot." Marcus told the officers about the threat, gave them the time, our camera angles, plate numbers from the lot cams, everything, and asked for a patrol sweep at close. The officers wrote it up and said to call if they came back. Marcus walked me to the break room and had me sit while he checked cameras in the lot. 5 minutes later, he said the officers were parked by the entrance and the 2 men had driven off. Debbie suspended the transaction and canceled the sale for cause. HR said I could go home early. Marcus still walked me to my car after my shift, had me unlock it from a distance, checked the back seat, then waited until I drove out of sight. I didn't go back the next day. For weeks I parked close to the door, asked for escorts at night. and kept pepper spray in my coat pocket with the safety off. Legal in our state, our team all carried it after the gas can guy. The store banned both men and posted their photos at the entrance. Still, every time a 50-something guy with a buddy came through, my body braced, and I scanned plates on my way in without making it a whole thing. I filed updates with HR and corporate security because patterns matter, and ignoring threats doesn't make them less real. I don't work at Tech World anymore. I moved to an office job where the worst argument is over calendar invites, and I still think about how much hate some people carry just because someone looks different. So, I'll just breeze through the background to get to the stuff that actually matters. I'm a freelance photographer, and back in late April, I was shooting an art gallery opening for a local magazine. The event was downtown, some contemporary painting exhibition with maybe 50 people milling around. This guy David approached me while I was photographing one of the installations. Turned out he was the artist who created that piece. We got talking about camera techniques, composition, lighting, the usual shop talk. He seemed interesting, mid-30s, sharp eyes, good sense of humor. When the official part wrapped up, we continued the conversation at a cafe across the street. We talked for maybe 2 hours about art, work, city life, nothing that seemed unusual. At some point I mentioned I lived in the Riverside district near the old water tower, and he said he sometimes visited that area to paint urban landscapes. Before we parted ways, we exchanged phone numbers. David said he wanted me to photograph his next series of works for a catalog. He was preparing a solo exhibition for fall. I liked the idea of the collaboration. Over the next few days we called each other a couple times, discussing details of the future shoot, fees, dates. The conversations were professional but friendly. I didn't see anything weird about this connection. In my line of work, networking with artists was standard. About a week after we met, on a Friday evening, I was home working on photo editing. It was around 11:30 when I heard a strange sound from the garage side. A metallic clang, like someone trying to force the door open. My garage was attached to the house with a door leading directly to the kitchen. I muted my speakers and listened again. That cold little pause where you try to decide if it's pipes or trouble. Another muted scrape, like a tool slipping. I grabbed my phone and a flashlight, no hero moves, killed the kitchen light, and stood by the interior garage door for a few seconds, just breathing quiet. I didn't hear footsteps, so I went out the front instead and kept the porch light off. The street was empty, late enough that even the usual dog walkers were done. I went along the hedges, staying on the gravel, and came around to the driveway. Nobody was at the garage door, but the lock had fresh scratches, bright, raw lines against the chipped blue paint. Not old. I swept the beam around. No drop tool, no footprints I could make out. Whoever it was had bailed fast. I called the non-emergency line and they still sent a patrol car within 15 minutes. 2 officers checked the perimeter with me, looked at the lock, asked if anyone knew my schedule. I said just clients, and maybe neighbors could guess when I was out on jobs. They wrote it up, gave me the usual advice. Sensors, better deadbolt, camera over the driveway. One of them tapped the scratches with a pen and said, "Looks like someone tested it, heard you, and spooked." Which honestly was the best case scenario. I changed the batteries on the motion lights, double-checked windows, locked the bedroom door. Yeah, I know it's flimsy, but it made me feel organized. And went back to editing. Hard to focus though. My mind kept replaying that scrape. The next day I ordered a couple of Wi-Fi cameras and a heavier padlock for the side gate. Normal Saturday errands otherwise, nothing dramatic. David texted asking if we could pencil a location scout for mid-May, abandoned warehouses near the river. And I told him sure, I knew a couple of rooftops with clean lines. He sent a thumbs up. That night, I slept in a t-shirt with jeans folded on the chair and my keys in the pocket, which is the kind of thing you do when you're trying to convince yourself you'll react faster if something happens. Does anyone ever react faster? The next night, something worse happened. At 2:30 in the morning, the smell of smoke woke me up. Not a lot, just that chemical burn hit in the nose that bulldozes sleep. I looked out the bedroom window and saw an orange glow throwing shaky shadows across the fence. My trash bin by the fence was on fire. Flames were licking up the slats of the wooden fence, and it's maybe 5 meters from the house. I grabbed the extinguisher from the laundry closet, ran barefoot down the hall, and hit the porch light. The flames surged a little like they didn't care. I yanked the bin forward by the handle to clear the fence. It burned my palm through the plastic, popped the pin, and blasted the base of the fire. Short bursts, sweeping. It coughed, shrank, flared, then finally choked out into smoke and stinking foam. I called 911 and went back to hit the hot spots that popped while I waited. The fence was blistered, but not a full loss. A neighbor's bathroom window light came on and he yelled, "You good?" And I yelled back, "Yeah, fire department's coming." 2 cruisers and an engine showed. They checked the fence for embers, soaked the area. Then one officer crouched by the bin and said, "Smell that?" I did. Lighter fluid, strong and sweet and wrong at the same time. He used a gloved hand to move the half-melted lid and pointed with his flashlight. In the bin, they found a burnt rag soaked with kerosene. After the 2 incidents, I felt uneasy in my own home. Like every noise had a job now. So I slept with the bedroom door cracked and my keys and flashlight on the dresser. And I kept the extinguisher in the hall because why move it back if there might be a round 3? But the strangest part came next. David stopped answering calls. I tried him twice on Monday, morning and late afternoon, straight to voicemail both times. On Wednesday, I tried again and got that flat number unavailable message. I sent him an email to the address he'd given me for work, kept it simple and professional, and the message bounced back with an error like the address never existed. I stared at the screen for a minute and tried again. Same bounce. That was when the whole thing started feeling like a weird setup more than bad luck. By Thursday, I figured I'd get the gallery to pass along a message, so I went back to the building where the opening had been. The front door was locked and the posters were gone, just tape shadows on the glass. I called the number on a leasing sign, and a woman told me the show had been a 2-night pop-up by a group of independent artists, not a permanent gallery. I asked if she had a contact for an artist named David. She didn't. She checked her notes and said the space had been rented by someone named Michelle Torres, who curated the show. I asked for Michelle's number or email. She said they'd tried reaching Michelle about the deposit paperwork and couldn't get through, and that email was bouncing for her too. I said thanks and hung up, and just stood there on the sidewalk feeling like I'd missed something obvious. I went home and tried to find David's work online by the piece title I remembered, and his first name and our city, then by the style and a couple phrases he used when we talked about color temperature. The usual tricks. Nothing useful came up. Just other Davids and portfolio spam and dead links. I checked the magazine's event post to see if they'd tagged him. They hadn't. Now, before I make that into a conspiracy, pop-ups and pseudonyms are normal, but stacked on top of the scratched lock and the fire it felt connected. So I called the detective's number on my report and left a short update. He called back and told me to document everything, save screenshots, and avoid contact if anyone showed up claiming the work. Logical and simple. I mounted the new cameras I'd ordered, one over the driveway and one facing the side gate, set alerts to high sensitivity, and told my neighbor who'd yelled the other night that I'd share footage if anything else happened. That weekend was quiet. I worked, stayed home more than usual, kept my gear bag packed by the door with a spare battery and a second SD card, and tried not to jump at the dryer clicking. The police canvassed a few houses for camera footage, including mine once the Wi-Fi units were up. The only thing from the night of the fire was a blurry figure in dark clothing moving fast along the fence line. Hood up, no face, just a smudge. Another doorbell cam on the next block caught a sliver of someone's sleeve and a hard rectangle that looked like a gas can, but it was too far and too grainy to help. The detectives logged it, added it to the report, and told me they'd circle back if something better showed up. Weeks passed. I sent a couple of follow-up emails. They answered, but there was nothing new to tell me, and I didn't want to be that guy who calls every day. I changed the garage lock, put a bar on the kitchen door, and kept the driveway light on a sensor so it popped even if a cat cut across. After 2 months, the case closed due to lack of leads. The officer who called sounded tired about it, not dismissive, just real. He said to keep the cameras up, to call if anything new happened, to consider better lighting for the side yard. That was that. I never figured out if meeting David had anything to do with what happened at my house. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe I handed a stranger just enough to triangulate me. Riverside near the old water tower. Easy for a local to narrow down the block, then the driveway, then the schedule. But why the garage test first? Why the trash bin second? Why not the house if that was the point? Was it a warning or a thrill? Or some unrelated thing that landed on the wrong address? These questions stayed questions. David vanished as fast as he appeared. Michelle too. And I never heard about either again. I still keep his number in my blocked contacts as a reminder to keep work talk to work, and to never hand out a map to my front door disguised as small talk. The front door was wide open when I pulled up at 3 in the afternoon, which made no sense because the property records showed the building had been sealed and empty for 8 months. I'm a realtor, been doing this for 6 years now, and I'd seen plenty of abandoned buildings, but something about this one felt off from the start. The owner wanted a quick appraisal before selling, and I was already there with my tablet and camera, so I figured I'd do a fast walkthrough. It was a 3-story brick building. Used to be a dental center before the practice went bankrupt last fall after some lawsuit I never got the full story on. The windows on the first floor were covered with newspaper from the inside, which wasn't mentioned anywhere in the property description I'd been given. I hesitated for maybe 10 seconds before going in, telling myself I needed the commission and the building looked safe enough for a quick look. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped inside, damp and sour, like spoiled food, which was weird for a medical office. I started down the hallway, taking photos of the empty treatment rooms and making notes about water damage on the walls. That's when I found the sleeping bags in what used to be the reception area. 3 of them laid out next to cardboard boxes full of canned food and water bottles. The cans were fresh, dated from this week. There were also folded paper maps of the area on the counter, and a camping stove tucked behind the desk, like somebody tried to hide it in a hurry. And none of that fits, sealed and empty, right? I moved through the first floor, documenting everything with my camera, trying to stay professional even though my hands were starting to shake a little. In one of the treatment rooms, there was a cot with a neatly made bed, blanket tucked in at the corners like someone was coming back to sleep there tonight. On the old dental chair, there was a stack of women's clothing, expensive stuff, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. Way too nice for homeless people squatting in an abandoned building. I picked up one of the shirts and checked the tag. It was a brand I recognized from the mall. Easily $200 new. On the floor next to the chair were empty blister packs from prescription painkillers, the strong kind you can't buy over the counter, scattered like someone had been popping them regularly. I photographed all of it, feeling my pulse speed up, because none of this added up right. The building was supposedly empty for months, but these were fresh supplies, recent activity, expensive belongings. Then I heard a creak from upstairs, floorboards shifting like someone was walking around on the second floor. I froze, listening hard, but it went quiet again except for wind whistling through a broken window somewhere in the building. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand I don't do reckless. If I can't verify utilities are off and the structure's sound, I don't climb anything. So I stood there arguing with myself while my camera kept recording a stupid close-up of my shoes. I decided right then not to go upstairs alone. It wasn't worth it. I'd seen enough to know there were squatters here, and I needed to call the owner. I headed back toward the exit, already pulling out my phone to make the call from my car where I'd feel safer. When I stepped outside into the parking lot, there was a man I hadn't noticed before, maybe 50 years old, wearing a work jumpsuit, smoking a cigarette while leaning against a beat-up pickup truck. I hadn't seen that truck when I arrived, which meant he'd pulled up while I was inside. He looked at me with this long, evaluating stare and said, "Electrical problems. Meters are shut off, but somebody's tapping the line from next door." I said, "I'm just doing an appraisal. I won't be long," and tried to keep walking, but he didn't move. He took a drag from his cigarette and said, "Better not stick your nose in this. Dangerous here. Girl left on an ambulance recently, barely alive." I asked, "From in there?" And I swear he took half a second too long before nodding like he was deciding how much to share. He flicked ash, glanced at the open doorway behind me, then at my car like he was weighing whether I'd call someone. "You didn't hear that from me," he added, almost conversational, like we were talking about a loose gutter instead of whatever this was. I told him, "I'm calling the owner," and he said, "Call whoever you want, but don't go back inside, not today." And the way he said today made it sound like there was a schedule I didn't know about. I asked who he worked for, utility, city, the owner, and he smiled without showing teeth and said, "Just fixing what people break." Before I could ask what he meant, he crushed his cigarette under his boot, even though it was only half smoked, got in his truck, and drove off fast. I stood there holding my phone, trying to decide what to do, and I made the wrong choice. I called the owner instead of the police, told myself I was probably overreacting, that the guy was just trying to scare me off for some reason. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear wind and water. He said he was out on the lake, fishing, and could I make it quick 'cause his line was snagging. I gave him the basics: open front door, newspapers over the windows, sleeping bags, fresh food, and when I started to get into the designer clothes and the blister packs he cut in and said it sounded like squatters, and the property management company would post notices. I told him about the man in the jumpsuit and what he said about an ambulance, and the owner went quiet for like 2 seconds, and then said to email him everything, photos and notes, and he'd loop in the right folks. I hung up feeling stupid and also stubborn, like I had to do something, but I was scared of calling 911 with nothing concrete beyond expensive jeans on a dental chair and a stranger's warning. So I went back to my car, typed the email in the notes app first so I wouldn't forget anything, attached all the pictures, even circled things in red like the stove and the tags on the clothes, and I sent it. 2 hours later, he replied from his company address with one line, "Received. Handling it. No questions. No thanks." That night I tried to watch a show and couldn't focus. I kept thinking maybe the electrical problems line was a cover for something else, or maybe it really was just people stealing power, and I was making it worse in my head. I checked the county portal for any code complaints posted that day. Nothing. Day 2, I called the property management number he'd given me once for another listing. It went to voicemail. I left a message about trespassers, said I had photos. Day 3, same. Now, before I explain day 4, you need to understand I wasn't ignoring this. My job is to document and report, not to play cop. And I did exactly that. but the silence made me nervous enough that on the fourth day, I took a slight detour after a showing across town, just to drive past and make sure the door was locked. The building was gone. I mean completely gone. Just a pile of broken bricks and a cloud of dust drifting over the street. Bulldozer pushing debris into a dump truck while a water truck tried to keep the dust down. I pulled over and parked behind a delivery van, grabbed my folder like I could wave paperwork at someone and reverse time, and I walked straight to the guy in the hard hat who looked like a supervisor. I asked how they got demolition permits so fast because that normally takes weeks of paperwork and inspections. He shrugged and said, "Emergency demo, structural failure risk, happened quick." I asked who declared the emergency. He pointed at a laminated sheet clipped to a fence panel. The notice had today's date and a stamped signature I didn't recognize. "Owner got it all approved in one day," he said, like that was normal. I told him I was in that building 4 days ago, and it was solid, and he said he didn't know about that. He just runs the machines and follows the permit. I stepped away to call the owner, and his number went straight to a recorded message that said the line had been disconnected. I called the agency owner, my boss, and he said the dental center owner had terminated his contract that morning, no reason given, and had settled any outstanding invoices. I asked for an email trail. He said there wasn't one yet, just a call. I watched another bucket of debris swing around and drop with a crash, and a burst of papers like files or brochures went up and then down in a wet clump under the water spray. A guy in a vest told me I had to stand behind the tape, so I did. And I took a couple of photos out of habit that showed nothing useful, just dust and the stump of the old signpost. Sometimes at night I scroll local news and there are segments about missing women in our county. One from the mall 3 exits over, 2 from a bus stop near the hospital. And I think about that cashmere sweater and the blister packs and the neat cot, and how the man said, "barely alive," like he'd timed it. I think about how I didn't call the police because I was scared of sounding dramatic, and because I trusted a property owner to do the right thing when it wasn't his job to care. If I'd called that day, maybe someone would still be alive. Or at least there would be something to search. Not a hole in the ground and a notice with a stamp I can't trace. I made a safe choice, the professional choice, and it was the wrong one. I only noticed her when she ended up in the same pharmacy aisle as me for the 3rd time, even though there was nothing in her basket. Looking back now, I realize I should have left right then, but the exhaustion after a 12-hour night shift kept my brain from working at full speed. It was early morning, around 7. I'd just walked out of the hospital and ducked into the 24-hour place for ibuprofen and vitamins. At that hour, there's usually nobody there. Just a half-asleep cashier and a couple of people as worn out as me. The woman appeared in the first aid section right after me. I remember it clearly now, because she was the only customer in that corner of the store. Then I saw her by the cosmetics display, even though I didn't go over there. I just caught the same gray tracksuit out of the corner of my eye. When I moved to the vitamin shelves, she showed up at the end of the aisle again, this time staring right at me. My nurse instinct picked up something off in her look, but I chalked it up to paranoia after a rough shift. I grabbed the last bottle of vitamin D and headed for the register, thinking only about my bed. But then she spoke, and everything changed. Caitlin. She said my full name, and I turned so fast my basket smacked my thigh. Hearing your badge name out loud outside the hospital hits different, like someone tugging your sleeve from behind, and I realized I still had my lanyard stuffed half out of my bag. Rookie mistake after a night like that. She stepped in, too close for the aisle, close enough I could see the red rims of her eyes and the sheen of sweat at her hairline. I asked if we knew each other because I genuinely had no clue, and she said she'd seen my badge, that she knew I worked at Memorial, and she needed help with a prescription. Right now. No waiting, no runaround. Her hands were empty. No bottle, no paper, no phone with a message from a doctor, just that gray tracksuit and a stare that didn't blink enough. I told her, the quick speech I've said 100 times, that I can't handle prescriptions off shift, that pharmacy staff can contact the on-call, that ER is open if it's urgent. She leaned in until her sneaker nudged mine and said I had to, that it was just a system thing, and I could push it through. That's not how anything works. I covered my bag, feeling for the cold edge of my ID card and the keys under it, and took a step back so we weren't toe-to-toe. People at the counter turned and then looked away the way people do when they're not sure if they should get involved. She said my surname again, slower. Caitlin Morgan. The way she said it made my scalp prickle, like she was testing the weight of it. I kept my voice flat, explained again what I could and couldn't do, pointed toward the counter, kept my hands visible. Her face tightened, mouth pulled off center, and she moved with me when I tried to angle out of the aisle, like we were tethered. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Ma'am, I can't do that for you here," and walked. "No, only you. I waited for you." "You don't remember me," she was saying, louder now. The cashier finally looked up and then back down at the lottery tickets. I tried to run through last night in my head. Triage, chest pain, a kid with a fever, 2 drunks in hallway beds, a DV consult that took forever. But nothing put her face anywhere. My brain wasn't firing cleanly. 12 hours does that. I told her I couldn't help and went around to the short line with my vitamins and ibuprofen, pretending hard that this was just going to end at the register. It didn't. She stayed at my shoulder, talking about medication names without getting a single one right, saying I was obligated, saying nurses don't clock out from helping. We do, legally, for exactly this. I paid fast, signed without looking, grabbed the small bag, and thanked the cashier too brightly. The woman's voice kept hitching higher, and I felt the shift in the air around us. The small room attention, like we were on a stage. I didn't argue. I didn't preach policy. I just headed for the doors. Outside, cool air, empty lot, that quiet hour when night people and day people trade places. My car was in the far corner where I always left it on purpose so I'd have 10 minutes to decompress before the sun fully hit. Which, yeah, felt stupid now. 50 yards suddenly looked like a field. The doors hissed behind me and I heard the beep of the store security sensor, then fast footsteps. I pulled the strap of my bag across my chest so it couldn't be yanked, put the pharmacy sack in my crook, and dug in my bag without looking down. Keys weren't where I thought. I kept walking, not running, because running can tip something, and slid my fingers around chapstick, pen, badge clip, a folded shift report I hadn't tossed yet. The footsteps were closer. "'Cause you can do this," she was saying behind me, almost breathless. "You can just call the doctor." That told me too much. She didn't have a doctor, or she'd be saying the name, and my stomach went cold even as the air felt sharp in my throat. I angled one row over to put a pickup truck between us, used the mirrored window to check distance. She was maybe 10 paces back, fast walking, scanning like she didn't want to lose me if I cut. My fingers finally hit the metal ring of my keys, and I got them out, fumbled one, caught it against my thigh, and kept moving. A delivery van idled near the dumpster, driver on his phone, not looking. I almost called out, but I didn't want to escalate unless I had to. I wanted distance and a locked car, and then a call to the non-emergency line to report a disturbance. We do that. We document. We don't try to be heroes in parking lots. "Ma'am, please stop following me," I said over my shoulder, loud enough to carry. No threats, no profanity, just clear. She didn't stop. I hit the unlock once, lights flash, and aimed for the far bumper. My hands were steadier now that the keys were in them. The store doors sighed open again and shut. A tiny sound in the big lot. "Caitlin, wait!" she yelled, and the voice was much closer than I expected. I ran. The pharmacy bag smacked my knee, my tote slid down my arm, but I didn't stop until I reached my car. I hit unlock on the fob while moving, yanked the handle, folded in, and she still got her fingers around the edge of the door. "Give me your badge. I need access to the hospital. Give it now," she was yelling, voice flat and fast, and there was nothing I could reason with in her face. I planted my foot against the frame and pulled hard. She held for a second, knuckles whitening, then lost purchase when I jerked the door into her hand. She swore and tried to jam her arm back in. I slammed the door, thumbed the lock, and hit the start button with my other hand. The engine caught. I dropped into reverse and came out of the space fast enough that she had to jump sideways. Her palm thumped the glass. I straightened the wheel, shifted to drive, and rolled, not flooring it, just steady, eyes on the open lane and the mirror. At the end of the lane, I checked the mirror again. She stood in the middle of the asphalt watching me, shoulders squared, not winded, just fixed there like she expected me to circle back and be reasonable, her version of it. Even from that distance, the stare felt like a weight. I made the right onto the road, and only then let myself breathe. My fingers buzzed on the wheel, which irritated me because I needed to make a clean call. I hit the number for hospital security we all keep saved. When the dispatcher answered, I gave my full name, unit, and said I'd been followed out of the pharmacy by a woman demanding my badge, tried to force my door, gray tracksuit, mid-40s, red eyes, agitated. He said they'd notify the lobby and ED posts and radio patrol to sweep the campus entrances. I said if she wanted my badge, she probably planned to get into the building. He said, "Understood. We'll tighten checks." And this isn't the first time we've had badge requests off-site. Go home and lock up. I watched my rear view the whole way to the freeway, half expecting gray fabric to pop into the next lane. It didn't. Traffic was thin. I still looped an extra block before my street to make sure I wasn't being tailed. At home, I pulled into the garage, hit the button, and waited for the door to close completely before I relaxed a notch. Inside, I put my keys on the table and slid a chair under the knob without thinking about it. Sleep wasn't happening. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hand on my door and heard the way she said, "Give it now," like it was a simple errand I was refusing to run for her. About an hour later, still awake, the head of hospital security called me back. He said they'd reviewed the morning and prior nights. The same woman had been seen near the facility multiple times in the last few days, trying different doors. She changed her story each time. Mother, brother, boyfriend in ICU, always urgent, always vague. When staff stopped her, she would step away, linger by the smoking area or the shuttle stop, and then attempt another entrance. It tracked that she waited at the pharmacy across the street, watching for employees coming off 12-hour nights, tired, distracted, still wearing badges. He said, "If you see her again, call the police first, then call us. Don't engage. Don't try to explain policy. Just get to a safe place and make the call." I said I understood. He said they'd file an incident report and flag my name at the front desks, so no one would release information if she asked. We hung up, and the apartment went quiet again, except for my fridge cycling. I never learned what she wanted inside, or if any relative existed, or what she planned to do with my badge if I'd been careless enough to hand it over. Now I tuck my ID away before I hit the sliding doors at the end of a shift, and I park only in bright spots near the entrance, even if it means circling. And I leave any store the second I clock the same person more than once. Sometimes, on the way into work, I still scan the sidewalk for a gray tracksuit in the crowd and feel my jaw clench. Sounds paranoid, sure, but it keeps me sharp. Better to be paranoid than dead, like we say in the ER. It happened last summer when I was 22 and still doing stupid stuff like getting drunk at concerts on weeknights. Me and my friends had just seen this band in downtown Chicago, and most of us hit the bar after. I'm talking properly drunk, stumbling around, loud as hell. The only sober person in our group was Jessica. She didn't drink for religious reasons and always volunteered to be our designated walker when we took public transit. That night, we were heading home on the L with a 20-minute walk from the station through residential streets. Someone suggested cutting through an old pedestrian tunnel under the rail tracks. We usually avoided it at night, but drunk logic made it seem fine. Jessica said we should stay on the main road. We said it'd be faster, and she sighed and took point anyway. Jessica kept us moving, saying we should hurry because it was late and she had work early. I did a dumb tiptoe on the curb. Alice tugged my hoodie and told me to knock it off. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to know Jessica noticed stuff the rest of us blew past, and she hated that tunnel. Low ceiling, damp concrete, 2 weak bulbs. We cut a gravel lot with a dented dumpster and a narrow path down between a fence and a brick wall. She walked a few steps ahead, hands out of her pockets, head up, counting us with quick glances. Me, Alice, Marcus, and Derek were behind her, still talking about the encore. The tunnel was maybe 100 meters long, dimly lit, covered in graffiti. Halfway through, Jessica stopped dead and raised her hand for silence. I almost bumped her, then saw it too. Near the far exit, a figure stood still, all black, balaclava tight. Something metal caught the light in their hand. Before my drunk brain processed it, Jessica grabbed my sleeve and turned us around, pushing low and hard. We pivoted and saw the second one, same mask, planted at the entrance we'd come from. So now we were in the middle. The echoes died. Marcus swore. Derek whispered, "Are you serious?" and put his hands up. I pulled Alice to the wall. Jessica said, "Back to the wall, eyes up, don't run." And we did it. The one at the far end started walking toward us. The one near our entrance stayed posted, and I saw a small can on a key ring in his hand. My brain filled in pepper spray, and the alcohol fell right off me. The closer one spoke, voice flat. "Phones and wallets on the ground. Nobody needs to get hurt." He kept walking while he talked and kept cutting his eyes at Alice like he was already separating her. Jessica said, "Okay." Slowly. "Do it." Then looked at me so I'd go first. I set my wallet and phone down. Alice did the same. Marcus hesitated and then dropped his. Derek stared at the can and put his stuff down blind. We all said we didn't want trouble, which is what you say when you're stalling. But he kept coming. Jessica stepped into his lane and said, "Take it and go, man." Not pleading, just firm. He pushed past her shoulder toward Alice, and that's when I saw the blade. Small folding knife, clean shine. The entrance guy raised the can like he was lining a shot. I said, "We don't want any trouble." Again, because my mouth panics. Alice said my name and grabbed my sleeve. It broke open fast. The first attacker grabbed Alice by her jacket, yanked her in, knife at her throat. She screamed, and Marcus, drunk as he was, launched at the guy like a linebacker, arms around his torso, trying to wrench him off. The entrance guy rushed up and blasted Derek in the face with pepper spray. Derek went down, palms to his eyes, yelling for water. The spray hung in the air, and my throat burned just from breathing. Alice was kicking backward, and the knife tracked her neck as they stumbled. Jessica didn't freeze. She dipped, snatched a broken bottle from the trash line along the wall, and swung hard at the first guy's knife hand. She hit his wrist. He shouted. Grip popped. The blade fell. The clatter cut through everything. I lost a second, Then I kicked the knife away across the concrete floor. It skittered into the darkness with an ugly scrape. Marcus was wrestling with the first guy while Jessica pulled Alice free. He tried to bull rush us again, and it wasn't even a decision. The three of us who could still think, me, Marcus, and Jessica, just crashed into him together and folded him to the concrete. His shoulder smacked the floor, and I felt the pepper spray can scrape my wrist as we grabbed whatever we could. Sleeves, mask, hair through the knit, anything. He bucked once, twice. Then his head clipped the wall, and his body went limp enough that I loosened for a second. "Don't let go," Jessica snapped, so I didn't. Behind us, the first guy was on a knee, trying to stand, and Marcus pivoted and threw one short punch that caught him square on the jaw. The crack was a sick little sound, and the guy's lights went out. Jessica was already moving. "Jacket," she said, and ripped the first guy's jacket off his shoulders, rolled him, and yanked his arms behind his back like she'd done it before. She wrapped the sleeves and wrenched a knot tight, then tore off her belt and looped his ankles and cinched until his shoes squeaked together. "Check him," she told me, and I patted for another knife and came up empty. Derek was still on the ground, heels kicking, hands over his face, yelling that it burned and he couldn't see. Alice was crouched over him, saying she had his hand. "Just breathe. We're here." The second guy, the one we'd tackled, slid sideways and didn't do much after that except wheeze, so we left him. Jessica pulled out her phone and said, 911, but then, no bars, and turned in a circle like maybe an inch either way would fix it. Nothing. The tunnel sucked it all up. "We move," she said. "We take Derek and we get to the street." Marcus nodded, breathing hard, shaking his hand out like it hurt, and I felt how bad my own legs were trembling. "Grab him under the arms, count it," Jessica said. We counted. We lifted. We went. We half-carried Derek, one arm each, and Alice held Jessica's hand like a tow rope while we ran for the closer exit, stepping right over the unconscious second attacker because there wasn't room to be precious about it. We burst into the open and the air hit like relief even with the pepper sting still hanging on us, and there was a 24-hour gas station a couple blocks down with the fluorescent sign stuttering. We went straight for it. The clerk behind the glass took one look at Derek's face and hit a button and dialed before we even finished the sentence. "Cops and ambulance," he said through the slot. He slid a bottle of water out and a stack of napkins and told Derek not to rub. Jessica thanked him and kept repeating details out loud. 2 males, both masked, knife, spray, hands tied. Like a script so none of it got fuzzy. 2 cruisers came fast and an ambulance right behind. EMTs flushed Derek's eyes at the curb and asked him numbers and names. The officer with the notebook, older guy, told us to take them back to where it happened. We walked the 2 blocks with 2 officers while the other car stayed with the medics. Jessica led and pointed. We went down the same narrow path, past the fence, into the tunnel. It was empty. No tied guy. No second guy. No jacket around wrists, no belt on ankles, no knife glinting anywhere. Just scuff marks on the wall where the head hit, and a couple blood spots dotted on the floor. The older cop looked at the empty concrete and at us and said, "You're sure this is it?" We said yes, all of us, at the same time. He kept asking for the order of things, how many steps, which hand, what words. Like if we changed one tiny detail it would prove something. He didn't say, "You were drunk," exactly, but he said, "You'd been drinking, and late hour, and memory can be unreliable," and it felt the same. Alice was crying by then, and showing him the bruises at her throat where the blade had pressed, and he wrote that down, and he still circled back to the missing belt and the missing jacket like they were some trick we were pulling. Without evidence, he said, they would patrol the area and file the report, and we should follow up tomorrow. Derek could mostly see by then, just red and watery. and he kept asking if he'd done anything stupid, and we kept saying no. 3 years later, I still won't go through that tunnel. If Jessica hadn't reacted first, if she hadn't stayed sober and coordinated everything, Alice might be dead. The guy with the knife wasn't playing around. It happened last year when I flew into an unfamiliar city around midnight after an 8-hour meeting and a 5-hour flight. I'd booked a hotel with airport transfer included and had a confirmation email. Out of arrivals, just wanting a bed, I saw a woman holding a sign, Preston Hotel, Emily Carter. She wore a dark blue blazer with a logo badge. I nodded. She took my suitcase to the parking area. The minivan looked legit. Hotel decal, clean interior. She said she was Cynthia, started the GPS, and we pulled out. For the first few minutes, I answered a couple of work texts and watched the blue dot crawl along the highway. Cynthia did small talk. Where from? How long in town? And I gave short answers. She said the hotel kitchens did late sandwiches. I remember thinking, perfect. Sleep then, a BLT. I travel a lot, so I trust little signals, badging, printed itineraries, how a driver parks for quick drop-offs. Everything looked right. About 10 minutes in, we passed an illuminated roadwork sign and cones. Cynthia took an exit she said would loop us around. I didn't argue. It was late, and she was local. The lanes got narrower. Storefronts thinned into single-story units with roll-up doors. We crossed tracks, then turned where the lights went sparse. She said, "Night crews here are wild." I watched a forklift half-parked in a bay slide by and told myself it was fine. Then she braked hard, swung into a broad, empty lot by an old hangar-looking building, and killed the engine. No other cars. A dead lamp buzzed and went quiet. Before I could process why we'd stopped, she turned with a taser and said, "Bag, phone, jewelry, now." Her voice was clipped, practiced. She tapped the taser against the seat and fired it so I could hear the crackle. "Don't be stupid," she added. I tried the door handle. Locked, child safety engaged. Reflex, I tried it again. She repeated, "Everything," and brought the taser closer, just close enough to smell hot plastic. I put my purse on the passenger seat. "Zipper," she said, and I opened it slow with 2 fingers. I took out my wallet, passport sleeve, card holder, dropped them in a neat stack. Phone. I passed it over. Jewelry. I slid off my watch and earrings. My hands shook, but I kept them where she could see. She scooped everything with one arm like she'd done this before, then cracked her door. "Out," she said, coming around to my side. She opened the sliding door from the outside. Walked toward the building. It sounded like a standard line. I eased my legs out, keeping my hands where she could see them. The lot had fine grit that stuck to flats. The hangar had a rusted personnel door and a chain through the big slider. "Hands up," she said. I lifted them about shoulder height. "Go." I started walking. Behind me I heard zippers, cards thwacking, the clack of my laptop case unlatching. I kept my pace even because running would get me chased and yelling would get me hit. And if she wanted me farther from the van, there was a reason. I thought, keys, visor? Then remembered it was push-button ignition. I thought about the confirmation email and felt stupid for trusting a logo. "Stop," she said after maybe 30 paces. Then, "Keep going." I followed the cracked paint line of an old parking row because following a line kept me from doing anything dumb. I counted steps, 10, 20, 30, because numbers are something to hold when everything else is loose. A dog barked far off. I didn't look back. When I was about 60 feet away by my guess, I heard the van's door thump shut. The starter whined and caught. Headlights washed over the hangar wall and slid past me. I stopped walking without being told. The minivan rolled to the end of the lot, swung a U, and pointed its headlights across the asphalt. For a second, the beam passed over me like a check mark, confirming I was where she'd put me. At that point. Then the minivan turned and sped off, leaving me alone on the lot. There was nobody around, no phone, no way to call for help. I picked the road that looked less cracked and started along the shoulder, hugging the fence line because trucks could rip by without warning, and I didn't want to step into a blind curve and make it worse. I counted joints in the asphalt to keep my head clear. No houses, just low boxes with loading bays and locked chain link. I watched for any lit windows. Nothing, just those buzzing streetlights that don't actually help. I tried a couple doors on the way, padlocked. I kept moving. About 30 minutes later, by my guess, I hit an intersection with a 24-hour convenience store still lit. 2 pumps, faded sign. I went straight to the counter and said, "Please call 911. I was robbed by a fake hotel driver. I don't have a phone." The clerk, a kid in a hoodie under a smock, stared like he thought I was joking, then grabbed the phone. He asked if I was hurt. I said no, just without anything. He dialed and handed me the receiver, and I gave dispatch my name, flight number, the hotel I thought I'd booked, the route, freeway, exit, warehouses, and the hangar lot. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and wait for the officers. 2 officers came in about 10 minutes later, lights but no siren. They asked the clerk for the camera angle and moved me to the side by the racks so I could walk them through it without blocking the door. One wrote while I talked, the other radioed details. I asked if we could go back to the lot. They said the scene was cold and they'd send a unit, but I needed to ride to the station to file properly. They let me take a bottle of water from the cooler, and I told the clerk I'd pay it back. He waved it off and slid it over like he'd done this before. At the station, a detective named Rodriguez, mid-40s, clipped tone, put me in a small interview room and hit record. I told it again. Printed sign with my name, dark blazer with a badge, hotel decal, GPS on, her making me walk away first, the taser crack, exact words. Rodriguez printed my confirmation from the link I'd forwarded and said, "Preston Hotel doesn't provide transfers," then pointed to the spoofed domain. He said they'd been seeing this after an airline passenger database leak. Names, flights, arrival times. So the signs looked right because the info was right. They ran the plate I half saw, and it hit on a minivan reported stolen 2 weeks earlier from across the city. The badge description matched a counterfeit batch they'd seized last year. Wrong font, generic crest, magnetic back. Airport cameras caught the placard but not her face. Angle was bad, cap brim low, head turned. "I'm not gonna lie," Rodriguez said. "These are quick hits. In and out." Hard to pull prints off shared surfaces, Cynthia was almost certainly an alias. They swabbed my hands, photographed my ears and wrist where the jewelry had been, and logged a list for my cards, passport, and work bag. I signed statements and watched Rodriguez staple copies for property crimes and the airport unit. By 4 a.m., they'd filed it, flagged my passport, and set me up in the lobby phone area to start cancellations, while a victim advocate pulled the temporary ID forms so I could fly. I spent the rest of the night at the station on a hard chair, making calls, canceling everything, answering the same questions in shorter versions because I was running on fumes. They printed a temporary ID letter for TSA and gave me a ride back to the airport at first light. I flew home the next day with a paper folder and a plastic bag of evidence return slips. I never got my stuff back. The cards were dead before sunrise. My passport never pinged anywhere, and my phone might as well have been tossed in a river. Now I won't get in any hotel transfer without calling the hotel directly first, using a number I look up myself, to confirm they actually sent it. And I ask the driver to confirm the reservation back to me by name and last 4 digits of my phone. Uniforms and decals don't mean anything if you don't verify, and I know that sounds obvious, but it wasn't at midnight after an 8-hour meeting and a 5-hour flight. 3 months later, I got a letter saying they'd linked my case to 4 similar robberies in the same area. Same method. Still no arrests. The woman I knew as Cynthia is probably still out there, waiting at some other airport with another fake sign. Back in the mid-80s when I was 13, I lived with my mom and stepdad in a suburb outside a mid-sized city. Mom worked nights as a nurse, 3 to 11s most weeks, and my stepdad hauled freight and would be gone so long the calendar on the fridge felt more like a countdown than a schedule. On nights when she worked and he was on the road, I was supposed to lock the doors before it got dark, keep the TV low, and not answer for anyone unless I knew them. And if anything weird happened, I was to call our neighbor, Mrs. Garcia. Her number was taped to the phone. It wasn't a big dramatic thing. It was just our routine, and I liked proving I could be trusted, so I'd do my homework at the kitchen table and keep an eye on the driveway. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand we weren't paranoid people, but we kept it simple. No visitors, no opening the back slider, porch light on. That Thursday, around 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. I froze for a second, then went to the peephole and saw Brad, 18, tall, baseball cap, the kid who mowed our lawn some summers and was friends with my older cousin. He'd eaten burgers at our place once, joked with my stepdad about carburetors. I knew him, so I undid the deadbolt and opened the front door. I kept the chain on at first, because that was the rule. And also because my mom's voice lives in my head when I'm doing stuff like that. Brad smiled and said my cousin had asked him to pick up a baseball glove from our garage, one he'd borrowed and hadn't returned yet. I knew my cousin had borrowed Brad's glove about a month ago, and I even remembered him rolling it with a rubber band around it, so it tracked. I told Brad to hang on and I'd grab it, but he said he didn't mind getting it himself, it'd be faster. I hesitated, then unhooked the chain and let him inside, pointing toward the kitchen and telling him the glove should be in the garage closet behind the paint cans. Brad stepped in like he owned the place, but instead of heading to the garage, he stopped in the living room and looked around. He asked where my mom was, like it was casual, like he just remembered to ask. I told him she was at work. He nodded, no smile now. And with this small click that sounded too loud for such a small room, he closed the front door and turned the lock. His voice got quieter when he said that was good. We were alone then. My stomach dropped, and I felt like I'd made the dumbest decision of my life in half a second. I said the glove was in the garage again and started backing toward the hallway. Bedrooms on the left, bathroom on the right. Thinking if I kept distance and got to the master, maybe I could stall him or something. Brad moved forward faster than I expected and grabbed my wrist. It hurt right away, not dramatic, just this tight grinding pain, and he pushed me against the hallway wall with one hand, while the other came up toward my face like he was going to cover it or whatever it was. I didn't want to find out. I started screaming and tried to pull away, but he was so much bigger and stronger. Like all the air in the house got thin. He slammed his palm over my mouth and said through his teeth to be quiet, said if I screamed it would be worse, and I believed him because his tone wasn't performative. It was like he'd rehearsed that exact sentence. In that second, I remembered my stepdad kept a gun in the nightstand in the master bedroom, a little .38 in a sock. He'd shown my mom and me where it was with this whole lecture about last resort. Never touch it unless. I went still like I was giving up, then I bit down as hard as I could on Brad's hand. Skin and sweat, and he jerked back with a curse, hand flying off my face, and I tasted copper where his skin split and my tooth grazed my lip, and I didn't waste any time arguing or apologizing or anything. I twisted out from under his arm, yanked my wrist free, and ran, running down the hallway as fast as I could. Brad chased after me, but I reached my parents' bedroom first and slammed the door hard enough to shake frames. There was no lock, so I sprinted to the nightstand and yanked open the drawer, grabbing the heavy revolver tightly. My stepdad had taught me to shoot it the previous summer at my uncle's farm. Basic stance, breathing, follow-through, drills. When Brad burst through the door, I stood in the center with both hands up, barrel level at his chest. My hands weren't shaking. I'd practiced at the range, and his face went white while his hands rose slowly upward. He said my name carefully and told me to calm down, muttering that it was a joke, just messing around. I didn't answer. I kept the front sight steady, finger near the trigger, taking slack, not jerking, exactly like training. He said, "You're not gonna shoot," and I told him, "Back up," while he mumbled about the glove and misunderstandings. He inched backward, eyes flicking between the muzzle and the hallway, trying a smile that slipped off his face twice. "Your mom won't like this," he said. I answered, "Keep moving," and advanced 2 steps without crossing the threshold line. He shifted his weight like he might lunge. I snapped "don't," and he froze, swallowing whatever plan he'd considered earlier. He muttered "crazy kid," then louder said he was leaving. I said "good," and kept the muzzle centered on him. He cleared the doorway slowly, turned his shoulder like a sprinter, then bolted. Shoes squeaked, carpet thudded, the door slammed. I held on target at empty space, listening hard for another door or window. Nothing moved, so I counted slowly. At 30, I lowered the gun some but kept it out, ready, not putting it away until I was sure. I shut the bedroom door again even though it didn't lock and sat with my back pressed flat against it. The drawer hung open, and the sock my stepdad kept the gun in lay on the carpet by my foot. I slid it over the barrel, then pulled it off again because ready beat tidy, and I kept listening hard. After a while, I stood and cleared the house the way he taught me for once, corners first, eyes up. Bathroom empty, my room empty, closet doors closed, slider latched, the chain on the front door still swinging slowly outside. I returned to the master and sat on the floor with the gun across my lap, breathing through my nose. I watched the hallway gray lighten and finally heard keys at 6 a.m., the door open, and the cooler hit. I put the revolver back in the nightstand, shut the drawer, and walked to the kitchen like I just woke. I never told my mom what happened, because I thought I'd get in trouble for opening the door to him. That felt like the bigger rule I'd broken, which is stupid now, but it ran my thinking then, unfortunately hard. Later I learned that kind of shame is common with victims, the silence that makes you protect yourself by disappearing. I asked my cousin what Brad wanted, and he hedged, admitted he sold weed to friends, and Brad was short. So he figured the glove excuse would check if anyone was home, and maybe shake me for cash or product. I never saw Brad in our neighborhood again after that night. Not at the store, not mowing, not anywhere familiar. I never answered the door when I was home alone again. Not once. No matter who rang or what excuse. So, I'll just breeze through the boring parts to get to the stuff that actually matters. I was 26 and had just moved to Tacoma for a new job, renting this cheap 1-bedroom in an old building that didn't have washer-dryer hookups. The closest laundromat was 3 blocks away on this sketchy street, but I'd go every Thursday evening around 8 when it wasn't too crowded. This particular Thursday, I loaded my clothes into the machines, sat down in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, and started scrolling through my phone. The only other person there was this woman who looked to be in her 50s, short gray hair, folding laundry into these huge canvas bags. She kept coming over to me with random questions, asking if I had change for the machines, if I knew how to adjust the dryer temperature, what time it was, stuff she could have easily figured out herself. I answered politely each time, but I was getting uncomfortable because she was standing way too close to me and maintaining this intense eye contact while asking these pointless questions. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand I wasn't trying to be rude. My name's Marcus. I was new to the city, and I don't like starting problems in public places. So I did the smiling nod thing, kept my backpack wedged between my feet, and pretended to be busy on my screen even when she hovered over my shoulder like she could read it. She asked what building I lived in, just casually in the middle of some question about the coin changer, and I said something vague like, "Down on 10th, because you don't give strangers specifics." She laughed at that like I'd told a joke, then pointed at my laundry cart and told me I'd overloaded the washer, which I hadn't, and that was the first little flicker of that something is off feeling. When my wash cycle finished, I transferred everything to a dryer and stepped outside for some air, leaving my stuff tumbling and my backpack on the chair. I walked to the corner of the building to call my buddy from back home and ended up talking for maybe 10 minutes. When I came back inside, the woman had completely disappeared, and I noticed my backpack was unzipped, all 3 compartments hanging open. I checked everything and nothing was actually missing, but I know for a fact I'd zipped it all closed before stepping out. Inside that backpack were my driver's license, a couple of utility bills with my full name and new address, and some business cards from my office. A sick feeling hit my stomach, but I tried to convince myself maybe the zipper had just come undone somehow. I grabbed my laundry as soon as it was dry and basically speed-walked back to my apartment, feeling paranoid the whole way. When I got to my building, I glanced across the street and my blood ran cold, because there she was, that same woman, standing at the bus stop directly across from my entrance. She was staring right at my building, and when our eyes met, she gave me this slow, deliberate smile. I went straight in, locked the door, double-checked the chain, and told myself she just really liked to people watch, except I knew she'd open my bag, 'cause zippers don't undo 3 compartments by themselves. I put the bills in a drawer, moved my backpack to the closet, and told myself I'd switch laundromats. No big deal, right? The next night around midnight, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered it and heard heavy breathing for a few seconds. Then this raspy female voice said my full name, my complete address, and then the words, "I know where you sleep," before hanging up. I immediately blocked the number, but literally 5 minutes later I got a text from a completely different number that said, "Saw you at your window today. That blue shirt looks really good on you." The creepy thing is, I had been wearing a blue shirt earlier, and I had stood by my bedroom window for a bit. I called the police non-emergency line and explained what was happening, but the operator said without actual threats of violence or someone trying to break in, there wasn't much they could do except recommend I change my number and stop answering unknown calls. I said, "She said she knows where I sleep," and the operator repeated the script about not engaging and documenting messages. So I took screenshots of everything, enabled silencing for unknown callers, and dragged my dresser in front of the bedroom door because I wasn't going to be the guy in the headline who left it all up to fate. The next night, more messages, different number, different wording, nice socks, followed by a grainy photo of my building from the sidewalk level. I closed my blinds, turned off the light, and sat on the floor with my phone camera aimed at the window like that would help. At 2 a.m., I heard the soft chirp of my intercom, just one quick buzz like someone had tested it and walked away. I didn't go near it. I watched the peephole until my eyes hurt. By morning, I was running on fumes and late for work, and my boss pulled me aside to ask if I was okay. And I lied because what was I supposed to say? A woman from the laundromat is playing some weird game with my life. The next 3 days turned into absolute hell because messages kept coming every single night from different numbers. Sometimes photos of my apartment building taken from the street. Sometimes just bizarre phrases like, "See you soon," or "You can't hide from me." One message said, "Your mail comes late on Tuesdays. Sloppy," which made my stomach drop because I'd left a bill sticking out of my box that morning. I started taking the stairs instead of the elevator, listening for footsteps on the landings. I changed my route to and from the office, doubled back once when I thought I saw a gray hoodie in a storefront reflection, and felt stupid for jogging across a yellow light just to avoid waiting on the corner. I called my buddy again and told him everything, and he said, "Dude, go stay with someone." But the only person I knew in Tacoma had a newborn and a no guests rule, and hotels cost money I didn't have till payday. I set up a cheap motion light inside my window facing out so I'd see a silhouette if anyone got close, and I kept my shoes by the bed in case I had to leave fast. Every night the phone would light up with a new number and another line. Sometimes Marcus, like she wanted the reaction. Sometimes silence followed by a photo of my building with the timestamp cropped tight. I barely slept and started checking over my shoulder constantly. On Saturday night, I woke up suddenly to this scratching sound coming from my front door. I lived on the ground floor, and I could hear someone trying to work a key or something into the lock. This metallic scraping against the cylinder, slow at first, and then more insistent, like they were testing each pin. I had 2 deadbolts installed. One I'd added myself, but listening to someone actively trying to pick them while I was inside alone made my hands go numb. I grabbed my phone, turned on every light in my apartment, and yelled, "Who's there?" as loud as I could, then followed it up with, "I'm calling the police," and the scratching immediately stopped. No footsteps running, just a clean stop. I dialed 911 and gave my address, told the dispatcher I was hearing someone at the lock right now, and she kept me on the line while I stood there staring at the door frame, watching for movement at the peephole I wasn't brave enough to look through. A patrol car rolled up in about 15 minutes, lights off, and the officer did a quick walk around with his flashlight, checked the knob, checked the latch, said he didn't see tool marks and didn't find anyone out back. He took my statement and basically gave me the same advice about getting cameras and calling right away if it happened again. I nodded, asked if I should stay somewhere else. He said, "That's your call," which wasn't super helpful, but I get it. They can't promise anything. I sat awake in my living room until the sun came up, TV on mute so I'd have light without sound. When I finally went outside that morning, I found my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had written in white chalk on the metal, "Your voice is beautiful." I took photos of everything, lock, door, mailbox, and went straight back to that laundromat, hoping to talk to whoever owned it, because I needed a name and I needed a plan. I found one of the employees working the morning shift and explained what had been happening, asked if they knew anything about that woman I'd seen there. The short gray hair, the weird questions, the way she hovered. The guy's face changed right away, and he said they'd fired a cleaning lady about 6 months back for stealing things from customers' pockets and following people home after their shifts, which made my stomach flip because that's exactly what this felt like, just more intense. He pulled up some security footage from around the time I'd been there and showed me a grainy image of a woman matching her description. She moved in and out of frame, hung close to chairs, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. It was definitely the same person. I took screenshots of the footage on my phone and brought them to the police station, and the detective said they'd try to locate her, but warned me that without her actually threatening me directly or committing a crime they witnessed, they couldn't arrest her, and also footage quality like that doesn't go far. I pushed back a little. She said she knows where I sleep, and he said to save every message, keep my door locked, and not to confront her. Another week went by and the stalking just escalated. Now she was leaving handwritten notes under my door like, "Hummingbird, sing again. I like your laugh." Ringing my doorbell at 3 a.m. and running away. And once I found a plastic bag on my doorstep that contained some of my own clothes from that first laundromat visit, folded wrong, like she wanted me to know her hands had been on them. I installed security cameras, changed both my locks, added longer screws to the strike plates, and started staying with friends some nights because I was too scared to sleep at home, and I wasn't going to be a hero. The cops never found her because apparently she'd been using fake names and had no permanent address. The employee said she couch surfed and did odd jobs so she could vanish for weeks. The messages still come sometimes from burner phones, and I've seriously considered moving to a different state, but I'm terrified she'll somehow track me down again since she managed to find everything about me from one trip to a laundromat. The only thing I remember from that summer day is the smell of rotting flowers that haunted me for months after. But I should start from the beginning. I was 13 when my parents left me alone for the first time for a whole week to take care of my sick grandmother in another state. We lived on the outskirts of a small town where our house was the last one before the farmland started. So quiet that you could hear the grain trucks whining a mile away. And yeah, we had neighbors, but the closest ones were a 10-minute walk and they were older and always busy. The first few days I enjoyed the freedom, watching movies until morning, eating ice cream for breakfast. Stupid, I know. No one to nag me about dishes. By Thursday, I was unbearably bored. The phone only worked for calls, our computer was ancient and slow, and all my friends had left for vacation. I stared out the kitchen window so long the screen made little dots on my vision, and finally decided I'd go see the abandoned farm I'd heard about from school friends, the one some eccentric gardener had owned. He died 5 years ago, they said, and his heirs never came to sort the place out. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how dumb 13-year-old me rationalized it. I told myself I'd just look from the road. I wouldn't go inside. I'd be back before dinner. I'd keep my house key on a shoelace around my neck. Mom's rule. And if anything felt off, I'd turn around. I left a note on the counter for no one. Walking south. Because that made me feel like someone knew, locked the back door twice anyway, and set out. The dirt road cut between dry ditches and those weird cattail weeds, and I kept counting fence posts to pass the time. Kicking stones, doing that thing where you step only on the faded tire tracks, 'cause the middle strip was spiky with goat heads. 40 minutes, give or take, and I saw a crooked fence and a gate with no lock, just leaning on its hinges. Beyond it was a yard swallowed by thorny brush, like it had swallowed the path too. I squeezed in sideways, thorns catching my shirt, and followed the clearer line toward the house until I saw the greenhouses, and stopped. There were 3 huge glass ribs with panes missing, the kind of thing you only see on field trips. Inside the first one, I could make out plants that were wrong somehow, too big, leaves shaped funny and folded over themselves, some stems as thick as my arm with those twist ties biting into them. Okay, I told nobody. 5 minutes, and I went in through a broken door. The heat hit me like a wet curtain, air thick and wet and tasting like fertilizer. Clay pots on their sides, rusted pruners, bags of fertilizer slumped open and crusted around the edges. In the far corner, something like a little lab, 2 tables, a rack for test tubes, notebooks stacked under a cracked plastic tray. I picked up one notebook and tried to read it, but the handwriting was a tight slant, and the words were all Latin-looking, dates, weights, arrows. I remember thinking this guy was serious, not a hobby guy, and I put it back exactly how I found it. Then I heard a creak, not wind, the actual creak of a door on metal, slow and careful. I froze with my hands still half out. I said, "Hello?" Just normal, like it was a neighbor. And right away I hated how small my voice sounded in there. I turned and saw a silhouette in the doorway of the second greenhouse. The person stood motionless and seemed to be looking right at me. I couldn't make out the face because the sun was hitting the figure from behind, turning everything into a dark cutout. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to call out, "Hey, sorry, I thought this was abandoned." The person stepped back, no answer, then disappeared around the corner of the greenhouse fast, shoes crunching glass, and that sound made the hairs on my arms go up because it wasn't an animal. It was definitely shoes. I knew I should leave. I did. But curiosity was stronger than fear in a really stupid way. Like when you're halfway through a scary story and you can't not turn the page. I told myself I'd just make sure it wasn't some kid from school messing with me. I left the first greenhouse and walked toward the second, slow, not sneaking, hands visible like that mattered. "Hello?" I tried again. Nothing. Inside it was worse. The plants there were clearly sick, some leaves blackened at the edges, some vines sagging into puddles that shouldn't have been there, and that smell of rot, that sweet, thick smell like trash water after a storm. I kept to the main aisle because the side shelves leaned and I didn't want a cascade of pots. I remember stepping over a tipped bag of potting mix that had split down the middle and thinking it looked fresh. Dumb detail, but it did. At the back wall there was a door I hadn't expected. A regular interior door set into plywood, paint peeled, with a hook latch dangling. It was ajar, and weak light came from below like a basement someone had rigged with one bare bulb. I said, "Is someone there? I'll go, okay?" And I waited, and waited, and the only reply was that humming greenhouse fan sound with the little clack each time it hit something, and my own breathing. I leaned down to look and saw steps, cement, narrow, damp in spots, and at the bottom, movement. Someone was walking down there. At that moment, something crashed loudly somewhere in the greenhouse. Instinct took over and I bolted for the exit. Didn't even look back, just shouldered through the hanging door so hard a pane rattled and a piece fell and shattered behind me, and I ran through the yard, catching my arms and legs on thorns that grabbed like wire. Didn't care. Kept going past the house, over a shallow rut, then through the gate that swung wide and banged off the fence. I didn't stop to see if anyone followed. I didn't listen for steps. I just hit the road and ran the way I'd come until the stitch in my side went from dull to sharp and forced me into that ugly half-run, half-walk. When I got home, I locked the back door, then the front, then checked the windows, even the tiny bathroom one, pulled the blinds, and dragged the kitchen chair under the knob like that would help. The house felt too bright, so I turned off lights and sat on the floor with my knees up, trying to hear anything over the buzzing in my ears. A car went by after a while. Normal. Then 2 quiet hours. Then it got dark, and every creak sounded like someone testing a window latch. I remember how specific that thought was. For the next 3 days, until my parents came back, I barely left the house. I only opened the door to grab the mail once, and that was dumb. The box squealed and I slammed it, and my hands shook, and I spilled 3 envelopes on the porch, and left them there until the next morning. I didn't tell my parents when they got home because I was afraid they'd punish me for trespassing, and also because the second I tried to picture saying it out loud, I felt like I'd have to explain why I kept walking toward a basement when any normal person would turn around. I told myself it was over, just a place I shouldn't have gone. But sometimes I think, what if that person really lives there? Like actually lives below ground where nobody would see, and I nearly walked right down into their space. Or what if I didn't see a person at all and I made the whole thing up in my head? which sounds nicer, except it doesn't help when something wakes me at night and I smell that rot. The thick, sweet, rotten flower stink, even though there are no flowers in my apartment. New state, new city, top floor. And it's 20 years later, and logic says that smell can't follow you. I've tried to rationalize it for years. Maybe it was a squatter, someone using the greenhouse because it was warmer and dry, and they didn't answer me, because answering makes things complicated with a kid who could call cops, so stepping back was smart. Maybe the movement in the basement was just the swing of that hanging bulb, and my stupid brain turned it into footsteps. Maybe the crash was old pane glass finally letting go because I breathed on the wrong frame. All of that sounds fine until I remember how the figure moved. That quick, deliberate step backward like they'd been watching me watch them. And the way they used the glass sound like a tool. Like they knew it would make me run. Now, before anyone tells me to go back with friends, no. I've mapped how that would go in my head 100 times, and it always ends with someone braver than me getting too close to a door they can't unopen. I did look up the property once when I was 26 and bored at work, county site, parcel maps, and the lot still existed. Owners listed estate pending, which didn't help. It just made me picture a paper problem sitting over a real one that kept growing. I've walked through a dozen botanical gardens as an adult, and none of those plants looked like what I saw that day. Too big, wrong shapes, the ties cutting into stems like the plants had pushed against their own restraints until they swallowed the plastic. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm trying to be accurate. Part of me wants to drive back, stand on the road at noon, just look through the fence and prove it's nothing but fallen glass and vines now. A bigger part of me is terrified of what's actually there, or worse, what's waiting for someone curious enough to lean down those stairs and say, "Hello," again. I think about that a lot, whether the person in the doorway recognized me, small town, faces stick, and if they remember the 13-year-old girl who almost walked into their basement and then ran the second they made a choice for me. Sometimes I lie awake and try to convince myself they forgot me. Sometimes the smell creeps in, and I know they didn't. When I was 26, right after college, I moved to Seattle and found a cheap room in an older couple's house. George and Martha Wilson were in their 70s, the type who sent me home with extra zucchini and told me to text when I got in late. And I know that sounds corny, but they were solid. The house was a 50s two-story on a quiet street. Their space was the first floor, small kitchen, TV room, their bedroom across the hall, and my room was upstairs with a little kitchenette and its own door out to a steep wooden staircase that ran along the side yard. I paid $400 a month cash. I know, crazy cheap even then. And I'd carry Martha's grocery bags up the front steps, or help George stack bags of soil in the shed. Nothing intense. It was mid-March 2015. Martha did her once-a-week overnight at her daughter's place to help with the grandkids, and George usually stayed home watching baseball reruns. But that night he said he was going to a veterans meeting and not to wait up. I was at my desk with my laptop open, trying to make my portfolio look less like homework and more like hire-me material, tweaking type, building mock-ups, telling myself I could land some junior graphic design job if I pushed through a few more hours. Around 11 at night, while I was editing a logo in Photoshop, I heard a car engine in the driveway. It had that throaty idle old cars have, and I figured, okay, George came back early. The outside stairs meant I couldn't see the driveway cleanly from my window, just a slice of the hood and the mailbox. But the car looked dark and boxy enough to be his sedan. A door shut. Then the front door downstairs creaked. Same slow hinge that sang every time, the sound I'd learned by heart by then. Usually George would call up "evening" or knock once on the wall like a dorky little Morse code, but it stayed quiet. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was on the phone, Maybe he was in one of those post-meeting moods. And I put on my headphones, low instrumental stuff so I could concentrate, and kept nudging letters around like that was the most important thing in the world. After 20 minutes, I pulled the headphones off to get water, and that's when I caught it. Furniture moving, a drawer sliding open, then another. The kind of wood-on-wood scrape that carries through a house built before soft close was a thing. I stood by my tiny sink, listening. It came in short bursts, like someone pausing to think, then going again. Drawer, pause, cabinet door, pause, heavier thump like a chair leg against the floor. I told myself George could be looking for tax paperwork, or maybe Martha's recipe book. She was particular about that thing. And I even picked up my phone to text him, thumb hovering, but I put it down. It wasn't my business to be policing his living room at 11:30. Plus, I'd been the anxious tenant before who overreacted to normal noises. City living will do that to you. So I forced myself back to the desk. The sounds went on and off until around midnight, and then tapered off. And I took that as my cue that he'd finally found whatever and gone to bed. I shut my laptop, washed my face, flicked off the kitchenette light, and climbed into bed with my phone like I always did. Doom scrolling jobs, then Instagram, then messages. Nothing from friends except a meme. I relaxed a bit, told myself I'd help Martha carry in groceries on Friday. Normal life stuff. The house felt still again. No pipes clanking, no footsteps, just the old refrigerator humming below me. At 1 on the dot, my phone buzzed. A text banner slid down from George. Emily, could you help me sort through some boxes in the garage tomorrow morning? Martha's asking me to find some old photos. I stared at the screen too long, like maybe more words would pop up if I waited. The timestamp said 1 a.m. The message was written the way he always texted. Proper punctuation, even my name, asking about tomorrow morning. Which was fine except for the part where it was implying he wasn't here right now. I told myself he could have stepped outside to his car to grab something and decided to text from there. He preferred texting over calling because of his hearing aids. But that didn't line up with how long those noises lasted, and how the front door never creaked again, and how I hadn't heard the garage door at all. I scrolled up our thread just to make sure I hadn't missed something earlier. Last message was him at 5 saying the meeting might run late. Don't worry if you don't hear me come in. My thumb hovered over, "Are you home?" Then backed off, because if he wasn't, I didn't want to sound dramatic. And if he was, then I was about to sound dumb for accusing him of, what, rearranging his own living room? I got up, padded to the inside door at the top of the stairs, pressed my ear to it, waited. Nothing. I cracked it an inch, just enough to see the black square of the stairwell, and kept listening. No TV, no murmuring, no fridge hum now, which made the quiet worse. I closed the door again, locked it, set the chain, and stood there with my phone lighting my hand. Emily, could you help me tomorrow morning? If George was texting me now, asking for help tomorrow, that meant he wasn't home. Right? I typed fast, not even breathing right. George, are you home? His reply hit almost exactly a minute later. No, I'm staying overnight at Frank's. The meeting ran long and we had some whiskey. Didn't want to drive. Why do you ask? My fingers slipped on the screen. I thought you came home a couple hours ago. I heard a car and sounds downstairs. The dots popped up like he was replying, then vanished, then came back, then stopped. My phone started ringing. I answered on the first buzz. His voice had that clipped tone I'd never heard from him. Emily, get out of the house right now. Don't use the inside stairs. Use your outside entrance. Go to the Harrisons next door and call the police. I'm on my way home. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I didn't try to peek. I just grabbed my jacket from the chair, shoved my feet into sneakers without socks, jammed my phone in the pocket, and yanked open the outside door. The wooden steps were damp, and my hands shook so hard, I grabbed the rail with both hands and kind of half slid, half stepped down, thinking if I fell I was done, so keep going. Keep going. The side yard was dark, except for the Harrisons' porch light glowing dull through the bushes. I cut across the grass, tripped once on the lip where our lawn met theirs, caught myself, and sprinted up their walkway. I hammered the doorbell over and over, finger not leaving it, like that would speed anything up, and rapped the wood with my knuckles in between because waiting even 3 seconds felt wrong. Mr. Harrison finally opened the door in a bathrobe and bare feet, hair flattened on one side. He started to say something like, "It's late," and then saw my face and just stepped back. "Inside," he said, no questions, and I was in the foyer breathing hard, trying to explain all at once. He said sit, handed me the landline, and I dialed 911 because it felt steadier than my phone right then. I told the dispatcher I was the tenant, that the homeowner thought someone was inside, that I had an outside exit and used it, and she told me to stay put with the neighbors. George called while I was still on with her. I declined and texted Harrison's. "Police on the way." He wrote back, 5 minutes out, which wasn't possible from Frank's, but I understood what he meant. He was coming fast. The patrol car rolled up about 15 minutes later, lights off, just a quick chirp of the siren so we'd know, and then another car. 2 officers took my statement on the porch, while a third circled the property with a flashlight. George pulled up about 5 minutes after them, parking crooked. He didn't even shut his door, just met the officers at the walkway and gave them the gist. They went in through the front, one hand on the door frame, announced themselves loud. We stood in the Harrisons' yard, me hugging my elbows, George with his hands on his hips, nobody saying much. They didn't find anyone inside. The first floor looked rough. Living room drawers yanked out and dumped. The little cabinet where Martha kept mail and warranties open. Couch cushions on the floor like someone checked under them, even though that makes no sense for valuables. In the bedroom, the jewelry box was empty, the top tray tossed on the bedspread. The coin collection that George kept in those blue albums in the TV room, gone. He said, flat voice, "A few thousand, easy." Their TV in the bedroom was missing too. They'd unplugged it clean and taken the remote. In the kitchen, a door on the side cabinet hung open. Nothing there mattered, but it was still open. One of the officers found glass on the inside carpet by the living room and traced it to the side window near the shrubs. A pane had been smashed in. He said whoever did it probably reached in to undo the latch, then climbed through. Outside, by that window, their flashlight picked up churned mud and partial footprints, treaded but messy, not enough to read a brand. The officer said the person likely walked out the front door when they were done, which lined up with me having my headphones on earlier. If I didn't hear the hinge, that was on me and the music. They dusted a few obvious spots, but the surfaces were either wiped or too textured. They took notes, took our statements again, gave George a card with a case number, and suggested calling the insurance and boarding the window tonight. I wish I could say I did something brave, but I didn't. I gave the timeline and kept thinking how I sat up there moving letters around while someone was below me pulling out drawers and pawing through their life. George and Martha never blamed me, at least not out loud. They kept saying the line about, "We're just glad you're safe, stuff can be replaced." But the house felt different after. It wasn't even the mess. It was the way we all moved quieter, like the floors might give us away. I couldn't shake the idea that if I'd texted him at 11 instead of assuming, the lights would have come on downstairs and that person would have bolted. Or maybe I would have heard the window at least. I don't know. 3 months later, I took a different rental across town because every creak at the Wilsons made me freeze. and I hated how careful they started locking everything while I was still inside. Like habit had been rewritten. We hugged goodbye on moving day, said we'd keep in touch, and we did for a bit. Holiday texts, a recipe from Martha, but the easy warmth was gone. I heard they installed an alarm system and cameras after that, but they never caught the person who did it. The men's locker room door rattled hard, and I stood there half-dressed, knowing exactly who was trying to get in. But let me rewind to how this nightmare actually started, because you need to understand I wasn't being paranoid. I was 17, working night shifts at this 24-hour gym in Portland 3 times a week to save up for a car. The place was pretty dead after midnight, so my job was basically just wiping equipment and cleaning the bathrooms. That Saturday around 1 a.m., this guy in his 40s walked in wearing an expensive tracksuit and headed straight for the treadmills. I gave him the usual greeting and went back to mopping the free weights section. Here's the thing though, he never actually started running or working out. He just stood there by the treadmill, staring directly at me with this intense focus that made my skin crawl. Even when I looked right back at him, he didn't pretend to be doing anything else or look away. I asked like, "You good, man?" And he lifted his chin once. No smile, no steps, no earbuds, just that stare. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the layout mattered. The front desk sat between the entrance and the hallway to the locker rooms. The office was behind the desk with a door that locked from the inside, and the supply closet sat opposite, always propped open when I cleaned. On slow nights, I'd rotate through sections, cardio, weights, bathrooms, so anyone paying attention could clock my routine. I hadn't thought about that until that night, and honestly, I wish I had. About 20 minutes later, I headed to the locker rooms to start cleaning, beginning with the women's side since it was empty. When I came back out to grab my mop bucket, the guy was standing at the front desk flipping through our member log, the one with everyone's emergency contact info and phone numbers. I said, "Hey, can I help you find something?" Trying to keep my voice steady and professional. He smiled this weird smile and said he was looking for the group fitness schedule, even though the schedule board was literally mounted on the wall right behind him. Then he called me by name, Ethan, which freaked me out because I hadn't introduced myself and wasn't wearing a name tag that night. He goes, "You always here this late, Ethan?" Place seems kinda empty. His tone was way too casual for such a specific question. My stomach dropped, and I muttered something vague about rotating schedules. He tapped the open log with one finger like he was making a point, and then wandered off toward the stretching area. I practically speed-walked to the supply closet. That's when I noticed my backpack was unzipped, and my phone, which I definitely left inside my jacket pocket, was sitting face up on the supply room table. The lock screen showed a missed call I hadn't made, like someone had opened it and backed out when the passcode screen came up. My keys were shifted too. Carabiner flipped the wrong way, and it hit me he'd been in here while I was in the women's room. Now, before you think I was overreacting, I've worked enough of these shifts to know what normal looks like. People flip through the schedule, sure. They don't dig through staff stuff or memorize names that aren't on tags. I stood there thinking through what to do first. Call my manager, hit 911, or lock the office and wait it out. But calling from the office meant stepping past him again, and I didn't want him behind me if he decided to follow. I grabbed my phone and walked back out, only to find him doing stretches right outside the supply closet door, nowhere near the actual stretching area or mats. He started asking more questions, whether I went to the community college nearby, if I wanted to make extra money doing private training sessions, whether I lived with my parents or had my own place. I kept my answers short. Don't really train, just clean, and said I needed to finish my work. He tried to keep pace beside me, shoulder to shoulder, like we were co-workers chatting. "You look young," he said. 17? I didn't answer. He laughed softly and said, "Good age. Lots of energy." The way he said it made me speed up. He glanced at the front door like he was checking something. I noticed the chime was off. Our manager sometimes muted it for inventory and I hadn't. Turned it back on because, yeah, routine. Then he drifted after me with this fake casual slowness that felt practiced. I cut toward the hallway and made a beeline for the men's locker room, planning to clean it fast and lock myself in the office until my shift ended. As I passed the desk, I slid the member log closed with my forearm. Nothing dramatic. I just didn't want him touching it again. And pushed open the locker room door. I hit the lights and the vents hummed on, and immediately something felt off. All the lockers were hanging open even though they'd been closed when I'd checked an hour earlier. On the bench sat a towel, a water bottle, and car keys with a local dealership keychain, like someone had staged a scene. A couple of the open locker doors had fresh smudges at hand height. There were no wet footprints, no steam from the showers. Nobody was actually using the place. I moved closer to the bench and saw the key fob had a cracked corner, like it had been dropped on purpose. It was too neat, too arranged, like bait. I said out loud, "Hello?" just to make sure I wasn't missing some dad who'd wandered in, and the emptiness answered back in that echo you get off tile. I turned back toward the exit, deciding I'd leave it for the morning manager and finish in the women's instead. I took 2 steps and nearly jumped out of my skin because he was standing in the doorway, completely blocking the only way out. He said he'd forgotten his stuff and came back to get it, but I hadn't seen him enter. The towel, bottle, and keys looked staged. Bait you set to compliance. He kept drifting closer, talking about me being a hard worker, how lucky he was to catch me alone, nice that locker rooms didn't have cameras for privacy, chatting there. I backed toward the showers and reached for my pocket of habit. Remembered my phone was in the supply closet because I'd set it down to grab Spray an Idiot. He suggested we go upstairs to the mechanical floor, said the AC sounded wrong, said he knew HVAC and could show me to listen for because staff cut corners night. I told him that wasn't my job and tried to slide past, but he shifted body to block, mirrored me when I switched sides, not touching, just making walls himself. I was about to yell when the entry chime sounded, and a couple started talking by treadmills, voices cutting air. He stepped back, scooped the towel and keys, and left. I waited a beat, followed at distance, and saw him nod at them in the hallway like he belonged. Then I ducked into the office and locked the door, sitting. I pulled up cameras, cycling front entry, cardio row, weights aisle, hallway angles, and feeds were clean. I rewound to 12:45 and played fast, looking for gaps he might ride. He hugged the blind spots, off the cardio lens, behind pillar by the mats, then down corridor to locker rooms. When the couple hit treadmills, he lingered, slipped out quietly. The chime was muted, but entry cam caught the door move, and 30 seconds later, his car rolled from the far spot with headlights off, then on at exit, nothing. I finished the bathrooms with the office door propped by my heel, and time the hallway went quiet. I paused and listened, kept moving, staying where cameras could see me. At 5:15 I called my manager and got voicemail, so I logged everything with times and details, including the dealership keychain, and saved 2 stills where his shoulder showed. 6 o'clock, replacement. Carla came in with a smoothie, and I told her fast. She looked at the prints and shrugged, said, "Weird customers happen, just don't be alone there." I mentioned the muted chime. She said the owner hated beeping. I asked about the member log. She said schedules were public anyway, and that was the end of it. Over the next month, I saw him 3 more times around 1 in the morning on nights I worked, and each time he chose distance instead of contact, which felt worse. First time he stood outside windows with hood up pretending to scroll while watching me wipe benches. Second time he idled off, keychain flashing. Third time he waited by dumpsters. I kept records, dates, and minutes, and where he stood, thinking if I had enough manager have act. But he said nights were mine, and members could be here whenever. I printed a trespass form I found online. He said we couldn't use it unless something happened. I asked for security. He pointed at budget taped on corkboard and laughed. I changed my route, stayed in camera lines, kept office door closed, moved member log into a drawer, clipped the panic fob to a lanyard, and practiced pressing it looking. 2 weeks later, a night he sat in car until 4:55, then circled once he was resetting a clock. I typed my notice, left my keys, walked out trembling. I quit 2 weeks after that, because I couldn't shake the feeling that eventually that couple wouldn't show up to interrupt, and I'd find out what he wanted from me. I never thought the person I trusted most at school would be the one I'd need to run from. It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself for weeks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My older brother Kyla died in a car crash that spring, right before I turned 14. He was my best friend, the one who taught me to play basketball, who always had my back when kids at school gave me shit. After he was gone, I just shut down. Stopped hanging with my friends, stopped caring about homework, stopped talking at dinner. Mom was working 2 jobs to pay for the funeral expenses and keep us afloat, barely home anymore. Dad dealt with grief by burying himself at work until 10 or 11 every night. My homeroom teacher noticed I was failing everything and sent me to the school psychologist, Mr. Reynolds. He was maybe 40, had graying temples and this warm smile that made you want to trust him. That should have been my first warning. Our first session wasn't like what I expected from therapy. Mr. Reynolds didn't ask the usual bullshit questions about feelings. Instead, he told me he'd lost his older brother when he was young too. Said he understood exactly what I was going through. He suggested we meet twice a week after school in his office, just to talk about whatever. The first few weeks were actually helpful. We talked about Kyla, about basketball, about school. He brought board games and comics like the ones my brother used to read. He started leaving notes in my locker with dumb jokes or hang in there stuff, and my grades bumped up for the first time in months. I figured maybe I wasn't completely alone anymore, and honestly, I clung to that because home felt like walking into a dark room you didn't want to be in. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand that adults at school felt safer than family for a while. Not because they were better, just because they were awake and looking at me. So I was grateful, like embarrassingly grateful. Around week 4, the notes changed. One said, "Missed you this weekend." Another said, "Do you think about me as much as I think about you?" I stood there reading that line over and over and told myself it was just awkward adult phrasing. I shoved the note behind my math book and acted normal, and if I hesitated before our next session, I told myself it was just because we were getting into harder stuff about Kyla. The after-school meetings started running late, sometimes until 7 when the school was dead, except for the buzzing lights and the janitor's carts. Mr. Reynolds began locking his office door, saying the janitors might interrupt our conversations if he didn't. The click sounded louder than it should have. He dragged his chair closer, his knee almost touching mine, and said stuff like, "You're mature for your age," and "You show up when most kids would disappear." I kept my eyes on the bookshelf or the stress ball on his desk and nodded. When I mentioned basketball, he said we could shoot around in the small gym sometime, just us. No pressure. I said maybe. He smiled like I'd already agreed. One Thursday, he suggested I come to his house over the weekend. He said he had a collection of action figures from the comics we talked about, that I should see them, and he had a big TV where we could watch playoff highlights. I said I had plans with my mom. I didn't. And he frowned, quick, sharp. Then it was gone and he said, "Another time." That afternoon, 3 notes were jammed in my locker like he'd rushed them in. "You're special. We have a connection. Don't shut me out." I crumpled them, then smoothed them, then shoved them under my backpack liner because throwing them away felt like starting a fight I wasn't ready for. The next week he told me we should keep our talks just between us. Otherwise, teachers might misread growth as dependency. He said he could speak to my science teacher about extensions, and he did, and it worked. And I started to feel like I owed him something I couldn't name. At lunch one day, he slid into the seat across from me and said, "How's our guy?" Loud enough for my friends to hear. I forced a laugh and stabbed at my fries while he said he'd check in later and tapped my shoulder on his way out. It didn't sound like a threat, but it landed like one. After that, the notes came daily, sometimes 2 or 3 stuffed behind my books so they'd fall out. "Dreamed about you. You don't need them. We understand each other." He started signing with his first name like we were equals, and I never said it back. I read them with a heavy, sinking feeling and folded them so small my fingers hurt. I stopped walking past his office unless I had to. I practiced sentences in my head. "I think I should meet less," or "Can we keep the door open?" But when I pictured saying them, all I could see was his face after he got me an extension. That smile like I'd been saved. One evening, he turned the blinds so no one could see in and said we should try a guided breathing exercise. He told me to close my eyes. I kept them open. He laughed and said I was stubborn in a good way. When I reached for my backpack to leave, he stepped in front of the door just long enough for my heart to jump, then shifted and said he was proud of my progress. The hallway felt colder than usual. At the far end, a janitor pushed a cart, and I caught myself feeling relieved that someone else was there. The next morning, there was another note wedged under the top vent of my locker so I couldn't miss it. "You're confused, and that's okay. I'll help you understand. I started feeling sick every time I found one, but I didn't know how to make it stop without losing the only person who seemed to understand my pain. Part of me felt guilty, like I'd be betraying Kyla's memory if I pushed away someone trying to help me. Everything changed the day my classmate Derek stayed late after basketball practice. He was walking past Mr. Reynolds' office, and the door was cracked. Not much, just enough. And he heard Reynolds' voice say, clear as anything, "You remind me of the son I never had. I love you." And I was already halfway up from the chair saying I had to go because my dad was picking me up early. And then Reynolds slid in front of the door and rested his hand on the back of my neck like it was normal, like that was something teachers did. And I froze because what was I supposed to do? Derek said later he saw my face in the glass of the little window, and it looked wrong. He didn't wait. He shoved the door with his shoulder, and it banged the file cabinet, and he yelled, "What are you doing?" And Reynolds yanked his hand back like a kid caught stealing and started stammering, "You're misunderstanding. This is therapy. Boundaries are complicated. It's not what it looks like." And Derek didn't even answer him. He grabbed my forearm hard enough to leave a mark and said, "We're leaving now." We ran. Hallway, stairs, exit, no stopping for backpacks or the usual sign-out sheet. I could hear Reynolds calling my name down the stairwell, but he didn't follow. Or maybe he did for a second. I don't know. We were already outside, and the air felt thin and cold, and my legs turned to rubber. Derek kept saying, "Don't go back in there. Don't go back in there." Like I was gonna turn around. At the curb, he made me swear, like actually swear, that I'd tell my parents tonight. Not tomorrow. Not later. Tonight. I nodded because my throat wasn't working. He walked me the 2 blocks to my place and only left after I said yes again. At home, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the fruit bowl we never used, hands shaking so bad a spoon kept tapping the wood, and I told Mom what happened in bits, out of order, and she didn't blink or ask for proof. She picked up the phone and called the police and said her son needed an officer now. Dad came home early for the first time in 6 months, tie crooked, eyes red like he'd run all the way from the parking lot, and he put his arms around me and said, over and over, "It's not your fault," like a metronome keeping time while Mom answered questions and gave my school's address and said the man's name so carefully I could hear every letter. They fired Reynolds 2 days later. I didn't see him again at school. His office door had brown paper over the window and a folded chair leaning against it. A week after that, I got called to the police station with 3 other students. None of us looked at each other for more than a second. A woman at a desk checked our names off a list. In a small interview room, a detective I hadn't met before asked me to explain what happened, and then asked about the notes, how many, where he left them, what they said. I told them about the locker, the vents, the phrases I remembered word for word even though I didn't want to, and they wrote it all down. Turned out he'd been doing the same thing to other kids who'd lost family members, finding vulnerable kids and weaponizing their grief. Exact words the detective used, weaponizing grief, and it made sense in a horrible way. They had a box on the table with evidence bags, and the officer said they'd executed a search at his house. Police found hundreds of notes and photos of students, including mine, the ones I'd folded so small, unfolded now and flattened in plastic, his handwriting like a signature on every line. I recognized the photo of me on the bench outside the gym, the one where I'm tying my shoe. I don't even remember anyone taking it. They asked if I wanted to keep the originals later. I said no. There was a hearing, then a trial that felt slow and fast at the same time. He didn't look at me when I testified. The prosecutor read parts of the notes out loud, and I stared at the wood grain in the witness stand and answered yes or no, like we practiced. The judge gave him 8 years in prison. When it was over, the hallway outside the courtroom was loud with families and phones and reporters, and we kept walking until the sound dropped off. It's been 5 years now. I keep Kyla's basketball on my dorm shelf, and I still turn it in my hands when I'm stuck on a paper. Sometimes I wonder how Reynolds turned my grief into a tool against me, and the answer is boring. He watched who was alone and made sure to be there first. I'm in college studying psychology because I want to be what he pretended to be, someone who actually helps. And I mean that in practical ways. Open doors, documented sessions, no secrets, ever. I'm grateful Derek didn't walk past that office, and I'm grateful my parents heard me the first time. When kids from my building ask why I'm always early to my peer counseling shift, I just say, 'cause it mattered, and that's enough.